Now, it's been a few years since the G20 overtook the G8 as the key group of nations setting global economic policy. This week's G20 meeting suggests another big change, the decline in U.S. dominance. Joining us with more on this is Prasad, former head of financial studies at the IMF. He's now a professor at Cornell University and a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Ishwar, thanks for joining us. Let me ask, first of all, about how you would grade President Obama here. I mean, he didn't get the deal done with South Korea, and that's not going to help him towards his goal of doubling exports in the next 5 years.
No, definitely. Doubling exports in the next 5 years was a very ambitious target to begin with, and the only way really to achieve that target is by getting some movement on currencies, but more importantly, by getting market access. And for market access, these free trade agreements are going to be the only option right now because the overall Doha trade round is still stuck. So not making progress on the Korea FTA, where in fact the two sides really want to come together, doesn't set a good precedent.
What is the problem? I mean, why can't we come to an agreement either in Doha or with South Korea?
The reality, as with all trade disputes, is that the costs of any opening of markets is going to fall on a very limited set of people, and they tend to scream and howl the loudest. So the fact that the benefits are going to be much more broadly distributed gets lost in this. So the automakers, for instance, or those who are importing agricultural products, they tend to be ones that scream very loudly anytime there is any question of trade opening up. So it's narrow constituencies, and it requires some serious political will in order to get over that obstacle, and neither side has managed to rally that around yet.
Ishwar, you write today that this is not the G20's finest hour. I mean, if we look over the last few years, I mean, this seems to be an interesting time for so many countries. It seems like, for the most part, everybody's just thinking about their own self-interest. Maybe that's always out there, but it feels that way more so than ever. Do you feel that way as well?
There's been one dramatic shift since the crisis. During the crisis, everybody was at the edge of the precipice, so there was a commonality of interest. But now there has been a significant bifurcation developing in the world economy. The advanced economies, on the one hand, are plodding along. They have concerns about deflation. They need stimulative policies. The emerging markets are really zipping along, and they need tighter policies. Now, the problem is that these two sets of economies are proceeding on parallel tracks, and there is a lot of spillover across the two groups. So there is a set of fundamental inconsistencies in the policy settings that these two groups need, and we haven't been able to resolve that.
I mean, what do you see going forward? I mean, is everybody going to kind of act in their own interest? That's why you have such a disconnect between the U.S. Continuing to have things like QE2, while you have China raising rates. Are we going to continue to see that? Or at some point, will the global leaders, if you will, kind of realize the interconnectedness of everybody and start to act kind of together again, like we saw during the crisis?
Now, the long-term interests of all of these economies, China and the U.S., are exactly congruent. The problem is in the short term. One set of economies is not doing terribly well, and the set of economies that is doing well, emerging market economies, has one problem in common with the advanced economies, which is that employment growth is not very strong. And it turns out the export sector is very good at generating jobs. And of course, not everybody can be exporting more at the same time. So it's inherently set up for conflict, and the G20 didn't quite tackle that issue on this round.
What can the president do differently, or what do you think he should have done to make this work? Or is it are the issues kind of out of his control here?
Now, quantitative easing in the U.S. is something that is perceived as a big negative by emerging markets in particular, because they see the balance of benefits and risks in the U.S., which is intensively being debated even in the U.S., as being sort of balanced. But the problem is they don't see the benefits that clearly, but they see the risks very immediately, because all this cheap money in the U.S. is flowing to the emerging markets because they have better growth prospects. So they're getting hammered. In fact, it's a triple whammy: faster currency appreciation, asset market bubbles, and higher inflation. But of course, so they're not happy.
But of course, Ishwar, the president can't make those decisions for the independent Fed, right?
That's exactly right. And the president did a pretty good job, I think, trying to defend the U.S. policy and making the point that a strong and fast-growing U.S. is in the best interest of the world economy. But again, those benefits right now seem very tenuous to the rest of the world, and all they see are the risks. And in addition to loose monetary policy, the amount of debt being built up in the U.S., which the U.S. doesn't seem to be willing to tackle forcefully, is another big concern for the rest of the world. So the president was not on easy terrain.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Hey, Ishwar, thank you so much. Ishwar Prasad of Brookings.